Tom lived in a small town where most people followed the same rules, cared about their yards, and joined the local homeowners association. But Tom was different. He lived just outside the main neighborhood in a small farmhouse that had been in his family for many years. His land stretched out into a wide green space, and right at the edge of it rested a beautiful lake. The lake was not large enough to be called a river, but not small enough to be only a pond. To Tom, it was perfect. The lake was more than just water. It carried memories of his childhood, when his father would take him out in a small wooden boat and show him how to fish. His father always said, "The lake feeds us if we take care of it." Tom never forgot those words. He learned how to respect nature, how to leave the land better than he found it, and how to find peace in the sound of water brushing against the shore. Every morning, Tom woke up early, before most of the town had opened their eyes. With his fishing rod in hand and his old dog trailing behind, he would walk down to the dock. The air was cool, the water smooth, and the sky painted with soft colors of sunrise. Fishing was never just about catching fish. It was about the quiet moments, the patience, and the bond with nature. Sometimes Tom caught nothing at all, but he always came back home with a lighter heart. For Tom, the lake was freedom. It was his own place, away from the noise of rules and meetings and people telling others how to live. But that same freedom was exactly why some of the new neighbors disliked him. Over the years, the town had changed. Developers built new houses around the area. Families moved in, and with them came the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The HOA had a long list of rules for how a property should look. Grass had to be cut a certain way, fences had to be approved, and even paint colors were chosen from their book. Tom was never part of their group, and he had no interest in joining. His farmhouse had an old charm, with peeling paint on the porch and flower beds growing wild instead of being shaped into neat squares. His dock was worn from years of use, and his boat looked more like history than modern design. To him, all of it was beautiful. To the HOA, it was out of place. At first, the HOA board only sent him letters, politely asking him to consider joining and following their rules. Tom ignored them. Then came warnings, claiming that his fishing habits lowered the look of the neighborhood. He still ignored them. What they could not understand was that the lake was his family's land. It did not belong to the HOA, no matter how many meetings they held. The more he refused, the more bitter the HOA board grew. Some neighbors whispered when he walked by. A few board members even stopped near his dock to make remarks. "Looks like a waste of time out here," one of them would say, pointing at his fishing line. Tom would stay silent. He had no desire to argue with people who only saw rules and property values instead of peace and nature. Still, he felt the pressure. Every time he walked through town, he saw the looks. Some children even repeated what their parents had said at home. "That's the man who fishes in the dirty lake," one child once told another. Tom smiled and kept walking, but deep down, it hurt. He knew the lake was not dirty. It was alive. It had been healthy for decades because his family cared for it. But the board wanted control, and when they couldn't get it, they grew angry. One afternoon, Tom sat by the lake watching the water shimmer under the sun. His dog lay stretched out beside him, tail wagging lazily. He could hear the faint laughter of children playing somewhere far in the neighborhood, and he thought about how quickly things had changed. The lake had once been respected by everyone. Farmers nearby used to bring their children here to swim. Birds gathered, deer drank from its edge, and fish swam in thick schools below the surface. Now, the HOA treated it like nothing more than a problem. Tom tightened his grip on the fishing rod. He had spent his whole life learning patience, but patience was hard when people threatened the very thing that gave him peace. He didn't need their approval. He didn't care if his farmhouse didn't look like theirs. But the lake was more than his. It was part of the land, part of the water that flowed unseen beneath the ground. It was something that tied everyone together, even if they didn't realize it. As the sun began to set, Tom reeled in his line and looked at the calm water. He felt uneasy. Something in his gut told him the HOA would not stop with letters and harsh words. They wanted to control the lake, and if they couldn't, they might try something worse. His father used to say, when people want power, they forget about the land. But the land never forgets. Tom stood slowly, looking across the wide surface of the lake. He did not know what was coming, but he was sure of one thing. He would not abandon this place. The lake was his responsibility, his history, and perhaps even his destiny. The next morning, Tom followed his usual routine. He woke up before sunrise, brewed a cup of black coffee, and walked with his fishing rod down to the dock. His old dog followed behind, wagging its tail. The air was crisp, and the sky was just starting to show soft streaks of orange. It should have been a perfect morning, but Tom felt something different in the air, something heavy that he could not explain. When he reached the lake, he paused. The water did not look the same. Instead of being clear and smooth, it had a strange oily shine across the surface. Tom bent down, dipping his hand into the water. He lifted it to his nose and frowned. There was a sharp chemical smell, nothing like the fresh earthy scent he knew so well. He let the water run through his fingers, and a bad feeling grew in his chest. Tom pushed his boat out and rowed a little into the middle of the lake. Normally, the water there was clear enough that he could see small fish darting below. But that morning, the surface seemed cloudy. He dropped his fishing line anyway, waiting with the same patience his father had taught him. Minutes passed. No pull, no movement. Usually, by this time, a fish would at least nibble. After an hour, Tom reeled in his line. The hook was bare, untouched. He looked around the water, noticing silence. No frogs croaking, no dragonflies buzzing, no birds swooping down for a morning meal. Even the usual rustling of animals in the trees nearby seemed gone. The lake was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, almost sick. By the time Tom rowed back to shore, he was certain something was wrong. He sat on the dock, staring at the rippling water. His dog whined softly as if it sensed his unease. Tom picked up a bucket, filled it with lake water, and sniffed again. The sharp chemical odor made him pull back. This was not nature's work. Something had been poured into the lake. Later that day, as Tom was repairing a fence near the road, he saw two men from the HOA walking past. They wore neat clothes, polished shoes, and carried the confident air of people who thought they owned everything around them. One of them smirked and called out, "Still wasting your time fishing, Tom?" The other laughed and added, "Maybe it's time you find a new hobby. That lake isn't what it used to be." They walked on without waiting for a reply, but their words stuck in Tom's mind. The way they looked at him, the tone of their voices, and the timing of their comments made his stomach tighten. He wondered if they knew something about the strange change in the water. That night, Tom could not sleep. He sat by the window of his farmhouse, looking out at the lake under the silver glow of the moon. The water still shone faintly, but now it looked more like a wound than a mirror. Memories of his father teaching him how to fish came back, and with them, a deep sense of duty. His father had always said the lake was more than just a place to catch food. It was the heart of the land. Without it, the balance of everything around would fall apart. Tom leaned back in his chair, his mind heavy with thoughts. He had lived long enough to know when something was done with intention. Nature did not spill chemicals into lakes. People did. The HOA had made their dislike clear for years. They wanted control, and they wanted him gone. The letters, the warnings, the mocking, it all led to this. If they couldn't make him stop fishing by words, maybe they thought poisoning the lake would break his spirit. But they were wrong. Tom was not the kind of man to give up easily. The next morning, Tom took a glass jar from his kitchen and filled it with lake water. He held it up to the light, watching how the liquid swirled strangely. The smell alone told him it was poisoned, but he wanted proof. He decided he would take it to the city lab. He needed to know exactly what had been poured into the water. As he walked back up the hill to his farmhouse, Tom noticed something else. His garden, which he watered with lake water, looked weaker. The leaves of his vegetables drooped, and the flowers near the fence had started to turn brown. It was spreading faster than he thought. The poison was not only killing the fish but also the plants that depended on the lake. Tom stood in the middle of his yard, his jaw tight. Whoever had done this had not only attacked him but the entire land. They might have thought it was just about stopping him from fishing, but the truth was bigger. The lake connected to everything. It gave life to the soil, the animals, and even the people who lived nearby. As evening fell, Tom sat by the dock again, staring at the water that once gave him peace. His dog pressed against his leg, sensing his worry. Tom whispered softly, almost like a promise to himself. "I will not let them win. Not here, not with this lake." The lake was sick, but Tom's resolve was strong. He would find out what happened. He would find out who was behind it. And when the truth came out, the people who had mocked him would finally learn the price of their actions. The week after Tom noticed the changes in the lake, he decided he could no longer stay quiet. He had already taken a sample of the water to the city lab, but results would take time. Meanwhile, the signs of poison were spreading. His plants wilted further, the usual sound of frogs never returned, and each day the water looked duller. Tom knew this was not only about him anymore. If the lake was sick, then the whole community would eventually feel the effect. The HOA held its monthly meeting at the community center on Saturday afternoon. Normally, Tom never bothered attending. He was not part of their group, and they made sure he felt unwelcome. But this time, he put on a clean shirt, combed back his graying hair, and decided to walk into the meeting room. His presence alone caused a stir. Heads turned, whispers spread quickly, and the board members sitting at the front exchanged stiff glances. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Neighbors sat in rows of chairs, facing the board who sat behind a long table. At the center was Mrs. Allen, the chairwoman, a tall woman with sharp glasses and a voice that carried across the room. She prided herself on order and beauty, and in her eyes, Tom's farmhouse and his fishing habits had always been the opposite of that. When Tom took a seat near the middle row, silence spread. It was unusual for him to attend, and everyone knew something was about to happen. The meeting started with small topics, like lawn standards, paint approvals, and neighborhood events. But Tom waited patiently. His father had taught him that patience often made words heavier when the time finally came. After half an hour, Tom stood. The room fell quiet. "I have a question," he said, his voice steady but firm. Mrs. Allen adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Tom, you are not part of this association. Technically, You don't have the right to speak here. I live here, Tom replied calmly. My land is part of this community, even if I don't pay fees to your board. What happens in this neighborhood affects me, and what happens on my land affects you. There was a pause. Some people nodded, others frowned. Mrs. Allen pursed her lips. Go on, then. But be quick. Tom held up the glass jar he had brought with him. Inside was a sample of the lake water, cloudy and faintly yellow under the light. This is from my lake, he said. The water is poisoned. The fish are gone, the frogs are silent, and even the plants in my garden are dying. This didn't happen by accident. Someone poured chemicals into the water. Gasps spread through the room. A man in the back whispered, "Is that true?" A woman covered her mouth. People turned to each other in confusion. Mrs. Allen leaned forward. Mr. Tom, are you accusing someone in this room of poisoning a lake? That's a serious claim. Tom's eyes met hers. Yes. I believe the HOA is behind it. I've heard your complaints for years. I've read your letters. You want me gone, and you think if the lake is destroyed, I'll leave. But you've forgotten one thing. The lake is not only mine. It's part of this land, and it flows into the very system that serves your homes. The room erupted. People began talking at once. Some stood, demanding answers. Others looked pale, realizing what Tom meant. The board members exchanged nervous glances, but none of them admitted anything. Mrs. Allen raised her voice. That is enough. This meeting is not the place for personal grievances. If you have concerns about your land, you may take them to the city. As far as this board is concerned, your lake is your responsibility. Tom shook his head slowly. You can dismiss me all you want, but the truth will not stay hidden. The water you drink, the water your children bathe in, it all connects back to this lake. You may not care about my fishing, but soon you'll care when your homes feel the cost of what's been done. For a moment, silence filled the room again. A few neighbors whispered nervously, clearly shaken by his words. But Mrs. Allen ended the meeting quickly, cutting off further discussion. The board members gathered their papers, avoiding Tom's gaze. Tom walked out calmly, though his heart beat with frustration. He had expected denial, but seeing their faces told him more than words. They knew. Maybe not every member, but someone on that board was guilty. They thought by dismissing him, the problem would disappear. Outside, the air was cooler, and the sound of cicadas filled the evening. Tom stood on the steps of the community center, looking back at the closed doors. He felt the weight of being one man against many, but he also felt a spark of strength. His father had always taught him that truth had power, even if people tried to bury it. As Tom walked back to his farmhouse, he thought about the next step. The city lab would give him proof soon. Once the results came, no board or chairwoman could deny it. He would show everyone what had been done. And when that happened, the people who had mocked him for fishing would finally realize the lake was not his weakness. It was their lifeline. The following morning, Tom returned to the lake earlier than usual. The air was still cool, and the soft light of dawn painted the water in shades of silver and pink. He sat on the old wooden dock, his dog at his side, staring at the surface. The lake had always been his refuge, but now it looked like a silent warning. He could not ignore it any longer. He needed to understand the full impact of what was happening. Tom went into his farmhouse and pulled out an old box of papers his father had left behind. They were yellowed with age and covered in neat handwriting. There were maps of the property, notes about the lake, and diagrams of underground water lines that ran from his land toward the town. Tom's father had been careful to document everything, understanding that water was life for the entire area. As Tom studied the maps, his heart began to beat faster. He traced the lines of pipes and channels that connected the lake to the surrounding lands. He realized that the lake was not isolated. It fed not only his land but also streams that ran into the town's water supply. This meant that any poison poured into the lake would not only harm him and his property but also the people in the surrounding neighborhood. Tom's mind raced as he connected the dots. The HOA had tried to stop him from fishing, but they had no idea the consequences of what they were doing. Poisoning the lake would not just make the fish disappear. It would eventually affect the water that families used every day. Plants would die, animals would flee, and people might get sick. The lake was part of a larger system, and now it was in danger. Determined to act, Tom grabbed his coat and walked down to the edge of the lake. He tested the water again, dipping his hand in and bringing it to his nose. The chemical smell was stronger this morning. Something in the water spread faster than he had expected. He remembered the wilted leaves in his garden, the sickly flowers, and the absence of wildlife. It was spreading through the land and the lake system with alarming speed. Tom realized he had to find proof that would convince everyone, not just himself. The city lab might take days to provide results. Meanwhile, he needed evidence that showed the connection between the lake and the town's water supply. He took out a notebook and started writing observations, sketching maps, and noting the places where water flowed from the lake into the underground channels. As he worked, his dog wandered along the shoreline, sniffing at the water and occasionally barking at a bird that flew overhead. Tom paused and watched the animal. It reminded him of the delicate balance of life. One small change in nature, one careless action by humans, could ripple across the entire system. The HOA had acted without understanding this balance, and now they might be putting everyone at risk. By mid-morning, Tom had collected enough information to feel confident. He could prove that the lake fed the neighborhood's water, and any poison in it would affect homes, gardens, and families. He thought about the upcoming HOA meetings, about the dismissive glances, the mocking words, and the disbelief he had faced. This time, he would not rely on words alone. He would show them the truth in a way they could not ignore. Tom decided to visit a retired city engineer, Mr. Collins, who had once worked on the town's water system. He hoped Mr. Collins could explain the technical connection and help him prepare for what might come next. Tom packed his papers carefully and led his dog toward the road. The town was quiet in the morning, but the sense of urgency in his chest made him move faster. When he reached Mr. Collins' house, an old brick building with ivy growing on its walls, Tom knocked on the door. The engineer opened it, surprised but smiling. "Tom. It's been a long time. What brings you here so early?" Tom stepped inside and laid the maps and water samples on the table. "Mr. Collins, I need your help. The lake on my property has been poisoned. I think it connects to the town's water supply, and I need proof. Can you help me understand this system?" Mr. Collins examined the maps carefully. His eyes widened as he traced the water lines and channels. "Tom, you're right," he said finally. "This lake feeds directly into the pipes that supply the neighborhood. If it's poisoned, the effects will spread quickly. You need to act fast." Tom felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief because now he had confirmation, and fear because the situation was more serious than he had imagined. The HOA had acted without thinking, and now everyone could pay the price. He promised Mr. Collins he would gather all the evidence and take it to the proper authorities. As he left, Tom looked back at the lake. The sun reflected off the water, hiding the damage beneath the surface. He knew that time was limited, and he needed a plan to stop the spread before it became too late. The lake was more than his land, it was part of life for the entire town. Protecting it was no longer just about fishing. It was about saving the neighborhood and everyone who lived there. Over the next few days, the effects of the poisoned lake began to show in the neighborhood. Families noticed unusual smells in their tap water. Some said the water tasted bitter, while others complained it looked cloudy. Children came home from school with red rashes on their arms and legs after washing in the sink. Garden plants drooped and leaves yellowed even though families had watered them regularly. Everyone began talking quietly, worried and confused. Tom watched from the edge of his property as concerned neighbors walked down the streets, carrying glasses of water to compare notes. Some came to the edge of the lake, looking at the water that had once been sparkling and full of life. Their eyes widened as they realized how strange and unhealthy it had become. They did not yet know the full story, but fear was growing. The HOA board members, who had once mocked Tom for fishing, now faced angry phone calls and questions from residents. Families demanded answers, and local reporters started asking questions about the strange changes in water quality. Board members tried to blame old pipes, drought, or even recent weather, but no explanation satisfied the community. They realized the problem was bigger than they expected. Tom stayed quiet during this chaos. He could have shouted that he had warned them, but he did not need to. The evidence was speaking for itself. His lake, the place they had tried to control, was the cause. People could see now how important it was. He felt a mixture of satisfaction and worry. Satisfying because the truth was becoming clear, and worry because the lake was still sick and needed urgent attention. One morning, a neighbor named Laura came to Tom's property. She was a kind woman who had always respected his space, even though she had been frustrated with the HOA's strict rules. She held a glass of water in her hand, shaking slightly. "Tom," she said quietly, "I think you were right. Something is wrong with the lake. My children drank water from the tap yesterday, and now they have rashes. I don't know what to do." Tom nodded. "I know," he said calmly. "I've already collected evidence and sent a sample to the city lab. The lake connects to the water system. Whatever is in the lake will eventually reach the town. We need to act fast before more people get hurt." Laura looked worried but hopeful. "Do you think the HOA did this?" Tom sighed. "I believe some of their members tried to poison the lake to stop me from fishing. They did not understand the consequences. They only thought about themselves. Now, everyone is affected." Word continued to spread through the neighborhood. Families who had once ignored the lake began coming to Tom's property to see it for themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief at the chemical smell and the strange oily surface. Others looked at the dead fish floating near the edge, realizing the damage was real. The peaceful lake that had once been a place for children to play, animals to gather, and neighbors to enjoy was now quiet and dangerous. Tom spent his days documenting everything. He took photos of dead fish, wilted plants, and discolored water. He noted the dates when neighbors complained and kept copies of letters sent to the city lab. He knew that when the time came to show proof, he had to have every detail ready. This was no longer about him or fishing, this was about protecting the town and preventing further harm. As the sun set each evening, Tom walked along the lake, deep in thought. His dog followed him closely, sensing the tension. He could feel the anger and fear of the neighbors, and he also felt the weight of responsibility. He had always loved this lake, but now it had become more than a personal treasure. It was a lifeline for everyone in the area, and he had to protect it at all costs. By the end of the week, more complaints reached the city offices. Officials visited the neighborhood to inspect the water and gather samples. They spoke to residents, took notes, and asked many questions. Tom observed quietly from a distance, feeling both anxious and determined. The truth was coming out, and soon there would be no way for the HOA to deny responsibility. That night, Tom sat on the dock, watching the last light of the day fade over the water. The lake was quiet and still, reflecting the orange and pink sky. He held his head in his hands for a moment, thinking about the families affected, the animals that had disappeared, and the plants that had wilted. This was bigger than he had imagined, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. But Tom also felt a sense of calm. He knew the next step was coming. With the lab results soon to arrive and the evidence he had gathered, the town would understand the truth. The lake had been poisoned, yes, but the town would see how connected they all were to it. And when that happened, Tom knew the lake could be saved, and the community would finally respect it the way it deserved. The city lab called Tom early one morning. The results were ready. He grabbed a notebook and a pen and carefully wrote down the details as the technician explained. The water sample from his lake contained chemicals that should never have been in any natural water system. The concentration was high enough to kill fish, damage plants, and make water unsafe for people. Tom's heart sank and raced at the same time. The lab confirmed what he already suspected. The lake was poisoned, and anyone who had been drinking the water could have been at risk. But the confirmation also gave him power. With proof in his hand, he could show the town exactly what had happened and why the HOA's actions were reckless. He decided it was time to confront the people who had caused this. He went back to the edge of his property where the road passed by the lake and waited. By late morning, two men he recognized from the HOA approached cautiously. Their usual confident expressions were replaced with nervous looks. One of them, Mark, stopped a few feet away and said, "Tom, we need to talk." "Now?" Tom nodded. "I think it's time." They stepped closer, glancing around as if someone might overhear. "It was us," Mark admitted quietly. "We didn't mean for it to get this bad. The board, they told us to pour chemicals into the lake. They wanted to stop your fishing. We didn't think it would affect the water system." Tom listened carefully. He felt a mix of anger, relief, and disbelief. Anger because the men had endangered everyone, relief because now the truth was out, and disbelief because people could be so careless and selfish. "You didn't think?" Tom asked calmly, though his voice was firm. "Do you understand what you've done? The water from this lake goes to homes, gardens, and even schools. Children, families, pets, everyone could be affected. You risked everything just to stop me from fishing." Mark hung his head. "We were following orders. We thought it was just a small prank. We never realized the consequences." Tom shook his head slowly. "Following orders is no excuse when lives are at risk. You have to take responsibility now." The other man, Peter, added quietly, "We didn't want to come forward. We were afraid the board would punish us. But seeing the town's water and your evidence, we knew it had to be told." Tom stared at the lake, calm but determined. "Good. Because now the town needs to know the truth. And you are going to help me show it." Together, they walked to the nearest neighbor who had already complained about the water. Tom explained everything clearly, showing the sample and the lab results. The neighbors listened in shock. Some gasped. Others looked angry and worried. They realized the danger they had all been living with, and their eyes turned toward the direction of the HOA office. By midday, word spread quickly. Families started visiting Tom, asking questions and confirming their observations. The poisoned lake was no longer a secret. Everyone understood that the problem was not natural, not accidental. Someone had deliberately tampered with the water. The HOA board members were called to a meeting with the town officials and many residents. At first, they tried to deny it, saying there was no proof. But Tom and the two men from the HOA presented the lab results, notes, and detailed maps showing the water connection from the lake to the town's pipes. The evidence was clear and impossible to ignore. Faces went pale as the board members realized they could no longer hide the truth. Some tried to shift blame, others stayed silent. Residents demanded answers. The board could not defend their actions. They had poisoned the lake to control one man's fishing, and now the entire neighborhood had almost paid the price. Tom stood calmly, watching the chaos unfold. He did not feel joy in their discomfort, but he felt satisfaction that the truth was finally out. The lake had been a private treasure, yes, but it was also a vital part of the town's life. And now everyone knew it. By evening, the town decided to take immediate action. Environmental specialists were called to clean and restore the lake. Residents helped wherever they could. People began to realize how important the lake was and how it connected them all. The HOA board members were removed from their positions, and the town created new rules to protect the lake from any future harm. Tom returned to the dock as the sun began to set. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and though it was still sick, it seemed calmer. His dog lay beside him, tail wagging softly. Tom knew the lake needed time to recover, but he felt hopeful. The community had finally recognized its value. That night, Tom stayed by the lake longer than usual. The air was quiet, filled only with the soft sound of water lapping against the dock. He reflected on the events of the past weeks, the threats, the poison, the complaints, and now the truth being revealed. The lake had survived danger, and soon, with care, it would thrive again. Tom leaned back, feeling the weight of responsibility lift slightly. He had fought for the lake, not just for himself, but for everyone in the town. The battle was not over, but the first victory had been won. The truth had come out, and the people who had acted without thinking had finally faced it. The lake was still his refuge, but now it was also a symbol. A symbol of patience, courage, and the power of standing for what is right. The days following the exposure of the HOA's actions were busy and filled with work. Tom, along with neighbors and town officials, worked tirelessly to restore the lake. Specialists brought equipment to filter the water, remove toxins, and test its health at every stage. People from the neighborhood volunteered, planting new flowers and repairing areas of the shore that had been damaged by the poison. Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he walked along the lake. What had once been a quiet and private place was now a shared responsibility. The lake had always been special to him, but seeing the town recognize its importance gave it a new meaning. It was no longer just his refuge, it was a lifeline for everyone. Children ran along the shore, careful not to touch areas still under repair, but smiling as they watched Tom demonstrate safe fishing techniques. Families began to set small picnic spots by the lake, respecting the new rules that prevented harm to the water. Wildlife slowly returned, birds chirping, and fish cautiously swimming once again. The lake was healing, and so was the connection between Tom and his neighbors. The HOA board members who had orchestrated the poisoning faced the consequences. They were removed from their positions, and several faced fines for their dangerous actions. Tom did not celebrate their misfortune. Instead, he focused on the future. The town had learned a valuable lesson: the lake was more than just a body of water. It was part of life itself, and every person's actions could affect it. One afternoon, as Tom repaired the dock, a group of neighbors approached him. Among them was Laura, the woman who had first come to him in concern about her children. She smiled warmly. "Tom, we owe you more than we can say. You saved this lake and our town. We didn't understand how connected everything was until now." Tom nodded. "It wasn't just me. Everyone who helped, and even those who realized the truth, made a difference. The lake belongs to all of us in some way, and now we all have to care for it." Other neighbors joined in, expressing their gratitude and promising to protect the lake. Tom felt a quiet pride, but also a calm relief. The threat was over, and the lake could finally recover fully. As the sun set that evening, Tom walked to the edge of the water, his dog trailing behind him. He dipped his hand into the lake, feeling the coolness and softness of the water against his skin. For the first time in weeks, the water felt alive again. It sparkled under the fading light, reflecting the colors of the sky and the surrounding trees. Tom thought about the challenges he had faced. The letters, the threats, the poisoned water, and the confrontations with the HOA, it had all led to this moment. He realized that standing firm, being patient, and seeking the truth had not only saved the lake but had also brought the community together. People who had once ignored him now respected him and understood the value of the natural world. The next morning, Tom returned to his usual fishing spot. His rod in hand, he cast the line into the lake. Moments later, he felt a gentle tug. He smiled as he reeled in a small fish, healthy and strong. The lake was alive again, and with it, his connection to nature and the town had been restored. Tom looked around and saw families enjoying the water safely, children laughing, and neighbors helping each other care for the environment. He knew that his fight had made a difference. The lake was no longer just his responsibility. It was a shared treasure, one that everyone had learned to value and protect. As the day continued, Tom stood on the dock, watching the peaceful scene. His dog sat beside him, happy and content. The sun's rays shimmered on the surface of the water, now clean and full of life. The lake had recovered, and so had the town's respect for it. Tom whispered softly, almost as a promise, "I will always protect this lake. Not just for me, but for everyone who depends on it. This place is worth saving." The lake reflected the sky, the trees, and the sunlight perfectly. It had survived danger, and now it was stronger than ever. Tom smiled, knowing that the lessons learned would last a lifetime. The town, the lake, and the people were finally connected in understanding, care, and respect. For the first time in many weeks, Tom felt completely at peace. He cast his line again, waiting patiently as he always had. The water rippled gently, fish darted beneath the surface, and the sound of nature returned. The lake had been saved, and the community had learned the power of truth, responsibility, and respect. Tom knew that this was only the beginning. The lake would continue to need care, and the town would need to remember the lesson of the poison. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of calm. The water was clear, the sun was shining, and life was returning to the place he loved most. He leaned back on the dock, the soft breeze on his face, and watched as the lake reflected the world in its quiet, endless beauty. This was a victory, not just for him, but for everyone who called this place home.